I don't want to go to Mimi Linda's anymore. Brittany's little girl, Kristan, said as she was getting her ready to take to her mother's house. Brittany was confused by this. Her daughter never had a problem with going to her grandmother's house before. She always dropped Kristan off at her mother's in the morning and picked her up again after work. There were never any complaints about this before. "Why, what's wrong, Chris?" she asked. "I don't like the little girl," was the response. Brittany's mother had just moved into her new house only weeks ago, and though Brittany had already met most of the neighbors, she didn't recall any of them having a little girl. "What little girl?" Brittany asked. Kristan was silent for a moment, as if she wasn't sure she should continue. "The girl in Mimi's room. She comes when I'm watching TV in Mimi's bed and says mean things to me, and she has a band-aid over her eye because her daddy hit her. The blood makes her look scary. I don't like it." Brittany was deeply disturbed and confused by this answer. She didn't understand how Kristan could have come up with such a story. She knelt in front of her daughter, taking her by the shoulders, and looked into her eyes. "Chris, what are you talking about? Is this a real little girl or are you making her up?" Kristan stared at her mother silently for a moment, then shook her head as if refusing to say any more. Brittany sighed in frustration and stood again. She didn't have time for games. She was already running late. Deciding to drop the subject for the time being, she got Kristan into the car and left for her mother's house. Brittany's mother met them at the door once they arrived. She bent down and gave Kristan a hug. "Want to go watch TV, sweetie?" she asked. Kristan looked at her grandmother and shook her head, then walked in without saying anything. She headed down the hall to the back room that she used when she spent time at her grandmother's house. But as she passed her grandmother's bedroom, she walked by with caution and peeked in carefully before moving on. This reminded Brittany of their earlier conversation. "Hey Mom, do you know anything about a little girl?" Linda looked at her puzzled. "What little girl?" Brittany wasn't sure how to explain what her daughter had said. "Well, Kristan said there was a little girl here and that she was." She hesitated, then shook her head. "Never mind, it's probably nothing. I have to get going or I'll be late." Now that she was talking about it out loud, it sounded kind of silly. She hugged her mother goodbye and went to work. Though the strange talk with her daughter was still on Brittany's mind, it was soon forgotten as things became busy at the office. The day went on normally, and at the end of it Brittany picked up her daughter and brought her back home. That night, as Brittany was getting Kristan ready for her bath, she noticed 3 scratches on her daughter's upper arm. "Chris, what happened?" she asked in concern. Her daughter looked at her and said in a quiet voice, "I was playing with Chloe and got scratched." Brittany knew Chloe was a playful puppy, but she didn't think she'd hurt her daughter. It was probably just an accident though. She'd talked to her mother about clipping the puppy's nails so that it wouldn't happen again. Brittany finished giving Kristan her bath and put her to bed. Before she turned out the light, her daughter asked, "Do I have to go to Mimi's tomorrow?" Brittany looked back at her daughter. "No, Mommy's off tomorrow so you can stay home." She remembered what her daughter had said that morning and paused in the doorway. "Did you see the mean little girl again?" she asked. Kristan quickly shook her head and rolled over with her back to her mother, hugging her teddy tightly. Brittany watched her daughter for a moment, then turned out the light and went to her own bedroom. Since she had the next day off from work, Brittany stayed up late watching television. As she was looking for something to watch, she came across a documentary on the paranormal. She had an interest in such things and decided to watch it. The documentary spoke of entities that died violent or traumatic deaths and became restless spirits unable to move on. They would often stay in the place of their death and haunt it long after they died. Sometimes there would be residual hauntings, nothing more than an echo of past events and people replaying itself over and over. Some were intelligent, using methods such as sounds and visual activity to make their presence known and even interact with the living. Then came the mention of children and spirits, how young children are more sensitive to the paranormal than adults and can often see things that adults can't. Some spirits can interact or communicate with children, and even attach themselves to them. Sometimes the spirit can be friendly, but there are times when the entity is dangerous. They can influence the child in negative ways, telling them to do bad things, or they may even hurt or scare the child. These hauntings usually cause strange or negative behavior, and a child may be reluctant to talk about it out of fear of being hurt. Brittany stopped paying attention at that point. Now her thoughts turned to her daughter, the odd behavior and mention of a little girl in her mother's house that couldn't possibly exist, and even the disturbing description she gave. She began to wonder if the scratches on her daughter's arm were actually from the puppy, or something else. Was it all just coincidence? Was Kristen just going through a phase, or was something else going on? It all seemed a bit far-fetched. But there wasn't enough to go on. She decided she would talk to her mother about it the next day and see what she could find out. The next morning Brittany gave her mother a call, hoping to gain more information from her. "Mom, do you know if the people who lived in the house before you had a daughter?" she asked. Linda paused, as if thinking, "No, pretty sure they just had 2 boys." "Why?" Brittany looked into the living room at her daughter. She was watching Dora the Explorer and paying no mind to her mother. Brittany spoke softly anyway, not wanting her to hear. "Kristen seems to think there's a little girl in your house and she doesn't like her. She says she's mean to her and says bad things and that the way the little girl looks scares her because she's bloody." Now that she said it out loud, Brittany felt kind of foolish. She couldn't imagine how strange it must have sounded to her mother. There was a long moment of silence on the other end of the phone. "Mom? Is that why Kristen doesn't like coming over anymore?" her mother suddenly asked. Brittany was caught off guard by the sudden question. Did she say something? She doesn't have to. Lately she just doesn't seem to want to be here. She doesn't like going in the back or watching TV in my bed anymore like she used to, and she asks how long before you come get her a lot. It was never like this before. She was always happy to come over, but now she doesn't seem to like it anymore. The description of Kristen's behavior at her mother's house made Brittany feel uneasy. Did it really have something to do with a ghost, or was Kristen acting out for attention? Her thoughts were interrupted by her mother's loud yawn. "Sorry, I haven't been sleeping well," she said. "Why? What's wrong?" Brittany asked. "Well, I keep hearing weird noises at night and—" Linda's voice trailed off. "And what?" Brittany asked. "Well, sometimes while I'm sleeping, I get woken up by something that feels like a tug on my sheets. Once I thought I even heard a giggle. I just roll over and go back to sleep thinking I was just dreaming, but now that I think about it there have been some strange things going on." Brittany's uneasiness grew. "Like what?" "Well, there are the weird noises from time to time, the tug on my bed sheets, and sometimes something isn't where I thought I put it, like it had been moved, and there are times when it feels unusually cold in my room, colder than it should considering it's summer and all. And Chloe acts weird too, she growls and barks at the empty air or acts restless like something's making her nervous." I figured she just wasn't used to the new house yet. Brittany remembered hearing that animals were just as sensitive to the paranormal as young children, if not more. "I never really paid much attention to all this before, but now that I'm thinking about it, it all seems kind of strange." She paused as if thinking again. "There is one other thing. I thought I heard Kristen talking to someone a couple of weeks ago. I looked in on her and she was playing with her tea set and dolls. I thought maybe she was just playing pretend, but what if she wasn't?" Linda's voice had a hint of nervousness to it now. "Mom, maybe you should look into that house's background or something, just to see if there's anything weird about it," Brittany suggested. She wasn't sure what she was expecting to find, or if there really was anything to find, but they had no way of knowing unless they tried. "I guess I could. Not sure if I really want to know though, I might end up moving again." Her mother laughed weakly at her attempted joke. Brittany started wondering if she should leave Kristen elsewhere during the day, just until they figured things out. "I think I might leave Kristen at Mama's house during the day instead of yours. Just for a while," she said. Brittany's grandmother was getting up in age, but she always enjoyed visits from her great-grandchildren. Brittany just hoped it would solve the problem, even if it was only temporary. "Well, all right I guess," Linda said, sounding a bit disappointed. Brittany couldn't help feeling guilty. She knew her mother enjoyed the company she got from Kristen since she lived alone. "Thanks Mom. Let me know what you find." After hanging up with her mother, Brittany looked in on Kristan again. She was still watching Dora the Explorer and answering Dora's questions. "Chris, how would you like to stay at Mama's instead of Mimi's for a while?" Kristan turned around to look at her mother. "I won't go to Mimi's house anymore. It's just for a little while," Brittany said. Kristan nodded solemnly. "Okay, Mommy." She looked back at the TV but now seemed less enthusiastic than before and had grown quiet. The sudden change in her daughter's behavior added on to Brittany's concern. She wasn't sure what to make of the situation between the strange activity in her mother's house and the effect it was having on Kristan. Was there really something going on, or was her daughter just having a childhood fantasy and would grow out of it soon? But what about the strange things occurring in her mother's house? Could it just be coincidence? Brittany felt frustrated knowing there was nothing she could do until they found out more about the house's history. For now, all she could do was wait. That weekend Brittany was off. She hadn't heard anything from her mother yet. Kristan spent the days with her great-grandmother and there had been no more mention of a little girl or strange behavior. It brought Brittany some relief to have her daughter back to normal. She was almost sure the whole incident had been a phase, maybe just a little girl's way of getting her working mother's attention, or her way of saying she didn't like her grandmother's new house. Either way, Brittany was just glad that things were better now. She sat on the couch with her laptop while Kristan lay on the living room floor coloring in a Dora the Explorer coloring book. Brittany's cell phone suddenly rang and she got up to answer it. It was her mother. "Britt, I'm on my way over. There's something I need to show you, but first check your email. I sent you something I found. I think you need to see it." Linda's voice sounded disturbed. Brittany froze at the sound of her mother's tone. "What is it?" she asked. "Just go check," her mother said. "I can't talk now, I'm driving. I'll be there soon." There was a cold feeling in the pit of Brittany's stomach as she hung up the phone. She almost didn't want to look at her email, but she sat on the couch and picked up her laptop again. She opened her account and clicked on the email from her mother. It was a news article dated about 13 years ago. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the title, "Girl Beaten to Death by Father in Home." She scrolled down reading the details of the article. A 6-year-old girl was being abused by her alcoholic father. After being questioned by a teacher who was concerned about the bruises on the girl, she told her that it was done by her father. When the father found out what she had told the teacher, he began beating her in a fit of rage and ended up killing her. Paramedics pronounced the child dead at the scene. Cause of death was massive head trauma. The father was arrested and found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. At the bottom of the article was a picture of a little girl in a kiddie pool in the front yard of her home. The house in the background was the very house Brittany's mother was living in now. She was an adorable little girl, with light blonde hair pulled up into pigtails and pretty blue eyes. A wide smile with a missing front tooth adorned a somewhat chubby little face. She looked a little younger than 6 in the picture. Perhaps it was a photo from an earlier, happier time. A tear rolled down Brittany's cheek as she stared at the picture. Her heart ached for the young life that had been tragically cut short. How could someone do something so terrible to a child? Especially their own. She looked at her own daughter and couldn't imagine ever hurting her like that. At that moment, Brittany recalled the way Kristan described the girl she had seen, how she had a band-aid over her eye because her father hit her, and that she was bloody. Brittany slowly stood and walked over to Kristan carrying the laptop. She knelt and turned it to face her daughter. "Chris, is this the little girl in Mimi's house?" Kristan looked at the picture, then looked up at her mother. Her face was blank. Her daddy told her not to tell anyone he was hitting her. She should have listened and he wouldn't have hurt her like that. "I wasn't supposed to tell anyone about her either because she doesn't like it when people say she's not real, but I was bad and told anyway. That's why she scratched me." She looked back at her coloring book and continued coloring as if it were just a casual conversation. Brittany almost dropped her laptop from the shock. The sudden ring of the doorbell made Brittany jump. She remembered her mother had said she was on her way and put the laptop down, hurrying to the door. Her mother looked somewhat pale when she opened it. "I'm freaking out, Britt, this is really messed up," she said as she walked in past Brittany clutching something in her hand. Brittany followed her mother into the kitchen and found her pacing back and forth nervously. "Mom, what's wrong?" Linda stopped pacing and looked at her. "Well, I talked to the people who lived in the house before me and they said they didn't know anything about the previous owners, but they were sure that a little girl lived there." In the front bedroom they found disturbing drawings on the wall inside the closet that looked like they were done by a girl. They put wallpaper up inside to cover them up. Brittany was confused. "Wallpaper? Why not just paint the walls?" "They did," her mother said nervously. "The drawings kept coming back." Brittany felt chills run down her spine. "Kept coming back? Through the paint?" Linda nodded. They thought for sure their sons were doing it, but the boys insisted it wasn't them. They said it was the girl. Brittany's blood ran cold. It was the same thing Kristen had spoken of. She said they figured the boys were just making up stories so they wouldn't get in trouble and just let it go. Anyway, they ended up putting in the wallpaper and covered everything up. "I went in the closet the other day and ripped the wallpaper out. I found the drawings." Linda held her hand out and revealed some photos. Brittany slowly took them from her and began looking through them. She felt like she was going to be sick. There were doodles of faces varying in size along one side of the closet. Most of them appeared to be of a man, a very angry one, with a big mouth as if he were yelling. Others looked like they were of a sad little girl that was crying. There were even a couple of figures, a big one holding up its arm as if about to bring it down, and a smaller one that looked like a little girl bent down as if cowering with the words "Don't hit me" coming from the smaller figure. There were other words like "way" and "what did I do?" written on the wall, misspelling on purpose. Brittany leaned against the counter for support. She felt weak as she stared in horror at the photos. "You said these were in the front bedroom?" "Yeah," Linda answered. Brittany looked up at her mother. "That's the room you're in, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Her mother was fidgeting nervously as she nodded. "Yeah. And that's not all, unfortunately. I started asking around about the family that lived in the house before the previous owners and found an older couple who's been in the neighborhood for over 20 years. They told me about the family and the little girl that lived there. Apparently the mother got into an accident on her way to work one morning and was killed. Soon after the mother died things changed for them. The father got depressed and started drinking heavily, and the little girl stopped playing with the other children and coming outside like she used to. She wasn't happy and cheerful anymore. They never suspected he was beating her though, not until the day the ambulance showed up and they brought her little body out on a gurney covered in a blood-stained sheet." Linda's voice faltered and she stopped. Tears built up in her eyes as she shook her head. "How could someone do that?" she asked in a trembling voice. "How could he just beat his own little girl and kill her?" Brittany shook her head. "I don't know, Mom, I just don't know. How could anyone lay their hands on a child like that?" As a mother, she found the act unthinkable and unforgivable. It made her sick just thinking about it. Brittany looked at the pictures of the drawings again. Everything was starting to make sense now. This poor little girl had been betrayed and killed by the very person who was supposed to love and take care of her. Now she was a restless spirit full of anger and unable to move on. It was heartbreaking. "I'd like to meet that bastard and give him a taste of his own medicine," she said angrily. "Unfortunately that's not possible," Linda said bitterly. "He's dead." Brittany looked at her mother in shock. "The article said he got life in prison. Did they change it to the death penalty?" "No, the couple I talked to told me he died not long after killing his daughter. Apparently he wasn't completely unremorseful for what he did. He couldn't live with the guilt of his crime. He committed suicide in prison a couple of months after he was sentenced. It wouldn't bring the little girl back though, and it wouldn't release her spirit. But you know, despite all these facts we still don't have any evidence of a ghost," Brittany said. Linda reached into her purse that was sitting on the counter. "Actually, there is one more thing." She pulled out a digital recorder. "I remembered hearing on Ghost Hunters and other paranormal shows that if you use a recorder you could catch the voice of an entity. I put one in my room and went grocery shopping. When I came back I listened to it." She slowly held it out to Brittany. "I caught something." I'm not sure why I'm up right now. It's almost 1:30 in the morning and the only company I have are infomercials, the sound of my air conditioner on a setting you see as the lowest, but sounds like a fan on the highest setting, and a friend from some distant past. I feel rather terrible talking to him right now. No, he hasn't upset me, it's more or less that feeling where you feel neglectful about not contributing to the conversation. I'm still trying to figure out why I'm still awake. The best guess I have for that is that it's the last day of school and I could care less about sleeping through what the day has to bring. Sitting here behind the screen, I can't help but to think about someone from the family tree. She used to come by every summer to stay a while, most likely because she had nothing better to do and her family made her crazy. It seems like the only thing that comes to mind about her is a story she told me when we walked a dirt trail in some woodland paradise. Along this trail, around the trees and rocks that would take us by the lake on the way home, she would tell it to me. She told me of a time when she was a little girl in a town that was near the land of the Amish. On a particular day, she went to a church with friends and local kids. They went in for prayer and talk of Jesus and his deeds. Of Adam and Noah and Moses and Solomon and Job and Lot above all. They sang songs, praising his name before they would cut loose to color the Lord with pastel crayons in a room with soothing music and apple juice and crackers. The day soon changed to night as a storm rolled into the place known for its crops and helpful people who live a different kind of life. It was then the children grew bored and wanted to play a game of hide-and-go-seek. A child stood in the corner to count as high as they said it, while the others ran to hide in the church. All the while the sound of thunder distracted the counter. While bad for her, it was excellent for the children. When she reached the decided number, she went all around to find her friends. One by one, she found them all. Lane, Sarah, Kyle, and Mike. Debbie and Amber. Bobby, Laura and Derek soon appeared at long last. As they brought the game to a close, when their parents were pulling in, they called for the hidden, Lucy, Johnny, and little Noah who were still playing the game. Call 1, Johnny came out from the bathroom, forgetting they ever played a game. Call 2, Lucy came out of the pastor's office, calling her grandmother to see if her health was improving. Call 3, little Noah was nowhere to be. They looked up and down for the little tyke, believing he might have hidden under a pew or gotten himself locked in a closet or that he cheated by running to the lot to go home. Illogical it was, when his father came out of the rain, waiting to bring him home with his snack in a bright blue lunchbox. They looked much more as a frenzy had arisen. She told me that while she sat by the door, Lane told her that he remembered hearing Noah giggle as he found the place to hide, staring back at the basement door by his hiding place. She told Noah's dad and Father James, who soon opened the door and descended down into the darkness. A flame was lit, and some of the children followed the grown-ups down the stairs. She stood at the top, looking down with Lane by her side. As quickly as it was when the flame of a match was lit, it soon died out. A light below flickered once, revealing all down below, walking around to find young Noah. When the light was swallowed, all was black once more until it was coughed up by some force. Then all were gone. She swallowed her fear and stepped through the doorway and looked over the rail, to see all were gone. The two of them backed away and left the place to find an adult to help them. When the police arrived, they found nothing but boxes and firewood for the wood burner. A small trap door was found under a box, which they were able to open with some difficulty. In the narrow drop, they found a little child, whose flesh was picked clean by worms of the earth. His eyes and hair were gone, and his mouth was agape, as if he had seen the greatest horror as the light escaped his eyes. He may have been missing for decades, but nobody knows. Nobody remembers seeing the missing boy go down those stairs, and nobody ever saw him come up. They put locks on the door to make sure nobody went down again, and all stories are just held as rumors. That was until a fire ravaged through the holy place years later, perhaps an act by God to stop the lies and the evil that plagued the land. As we made the trip back to our tent, she told me something she never told anyone before. She said that when she looked over the ledge, after the power returned, for a split second she could have sworn she saw a face on the floor and something being pulled into the wood burner. Something that looked like someone's feet. I assumed she was just shaken up by Noah disappearing, but she told me something I'd never forget. After the church burned down, police did a thorough investigation and found that in the wood burner that survived, human remains were found. The only thing found that was complete were 2 human feet, with remains of what are thought to be part of human hands and skulls were found deeper back. Also, in the same small pit of the trapdoor, were more remains that were undiscovered or recovered by the first team of police officers. Those remains were of more than one person. The first being someone who may have been a teenager and the other being a small child. If it was Noah, I don't know. I don't know why I'm even up right now. Maybe I should get some sleep. I'm seeing things out of the corners of my damn eyes again. Credit to AJ Gatsby. Post views 2,884. Please wait. It started with the usual. Waking up in different places on smaller scales. Fall asleep on the couch, wake up in my bed. Oh Randy, I was the same way at your age. My mother used to say, with smiles and turnaways that marked the end of discussion. Sometimes I thought it was my parents, but to what motivation would they do this? When I'm soundly in my bed, pick me up and lay me gently on the kitchen floor? No. This was me. It was around when I was 16 that they started to see it. My older sister Ann, 18 at the time, would be dozing by the TV when I'd solder and so very purposely sit beside her. Sometimes she thought I was awake, only to have me not recall it the next day. Then the talking started. I'd walk into her room one late summer night, while she's up on her computer and stare blankly at her. She'd question me, and I'd answer yes to every question, open-ended and all. Ran, you okay? Yes. What's going on? Yes. Sometimes she'd find me in places, usually asleep. On several occasions her walk-in closet, she'd yell at me and throw me out saying, even with your fucking narcolepsy or whatever, that's private. She was a very reserved person, and I always respected that in my waking life, even after she moved out. But it was all different asleep. Nothing was relevant, and none of it mattered. I'd tried everything. For a while I'd slept in a sleeping bag, zipped to the neck, with mittens. It never really worked. And I was beginning to wake up in stranger and stranger places. Granted, I never went too far from home, but it was becoming a regular thing that I'd wake up outside. Forests, streets. I was sleepless for days at a time and it made me delusional, but I didn't care, I just wanted to be normal. My best friend, Darren, was very supportive, always calming me down when I was so sleep-deprived I felt like my mind would implode. He'd coax me to sleep and promise to watch me, and for the most part, he did. Sometimes I'd wake up to little notes from him. Little affirmations, like, everything will be okay Darren. I'd find these notes in the cracks and rifts of my home, folded neatly and creased tight. Telling me it's okay. Darren and I didn't always get along, though. Sometimes we'd fight, and he'd leave. The guy had a lot of problems, maybe some form of manic depression. That's when I'd find the malicious notes, the notes that told me to fuck off and get over myself, which eventually progressed into darker territory. I'd find them around and it was as if they'd interact with me. Nobody loves you, all you do is destroy Darren. But I try so hard to be good. I'd think to myself. And every time you try, you fail. Darren, I'm so sorry. I'd whisper faintly, kill yourself. Darren. I should have just stopped hanging out with him, but he was all I had, then he'd leave me cold. I'd wake up in the dirt under cold sweat, with blood on my hands that I stole from myself in my slumber. This is why you're worthless, Darren. Annie was leaving soon. Going off to college. Over the course of a week her room faded to emptiness as she took all her things to her dorm, and then only she was left. She said she'd be out in a week. It had been months since I'd gotten a note from Darren. He hadn't been over to supply them. I was happy. Alone, but happy. He couldn't bother me anymore. And the night before Annie left, I went to sleep happy. I dreamed of beautiful things. Waterfalls and meadows, places where everything was in its right place. That time I woke up midday. No cars in the driveway, nothing too unusual, but my room was distraught. Dents in my wardrobe and a door off its hinges. Must have been a crazy night, but at least I was still in my bed. I went down the hall to check if Annie was still there. She never said when she was leaving. Her room was empty as usual, but something was off this time. Her closet was open a crack. She never left her closet open, not even the slightest bit. It was her private zone, her sanctuary. That's when I saw the little drops on the floor. Smeared like crimson pastels, like someone had gone over to spread them. I followed them to the closet, looking down the hallway. I reached the door and wrapped my fingers around the edge, slowly pushing forward. And there she was. Mangled and beaten. The veins in her neck torn out. The carpet was no longer off-white and dry, but moist and crimson. It was as if she were mauled by an animal. And I saw it. A little note on her chest, folded with the care and precision Darren had always prided himself on. But the signature was different. And then it hit me, clear as day. Like waves of clarity but still somehow topped with disbelief. It wasn't Darren. It was never Darren. I squeezed my eyes shut as I declared it to myself. I opened my lids as I read the note one last time, glazed eyes and trembling fingers. Everything will be okay. Randy. Credit to Anna Elise Groves. Post views 3,434. Please wait. I was awake. Alive, thank goodness. At least, I thought I was alive. I was solid and whole. Except for my head. It felt as though there was a hole there. I couldn't remember where I was or who I was. Something was coming back. A name. My name, I think. John. I tried to recall something else, anything else. I couldn't remember my past or present. I began to realize that I had no clue where I was. My heart began pounded as my eyes focused on my surroundings. I was in a room. It was pretty much empty besides a small desk and a bed. The walls were made of thick stone. I assumed it was to soundproof the room, as any sensible person would do. I looked for an exit. There was no escape, at least as far as I saw. There was only one thing in the room that really caught my attention. It was a paper, sitting innocently on the ground. I decided to pick up the paper, hoping that it would explain where I was, what was happening, and most importantly, who I was. The words were notes from a doctor. The paper had two simple sentences on it. He is dangerous. I have to take action. I was even more confused. What? Take action? Dangerous? What had I could have possibly done to deserve being put in isolation? I had so many questions. Only one solution came to my battered head. Escape. I had to leave and find out the answers. I looked closely at the walls. There were inscriptions on the walls. I could only understand one. As I read it, my heart began pounding wildly. Why can't death help me? My eyes widened as I realized another terrifying fact. It was written in blood. Worse yet, fresh blood. It seemed as though someone, perhaps the doctor, was bleeding profusely. I felt faint and fell to the floor. I opened my eyes and gazed at the ceiling. It was incredibly close. If I stretched to my maximum height, I could touch it. I noticed a rope hanging from the center. Curious, I stood and reached my arm out to its utmost length, clasping the rope. A trapdoor opened. Stairs fell to my feet. As stairs from the trapdoor descended down to my feet, dust rose in thick clouds, making me cough and hack. I was surprised at how easy that was. The note made it seem as though I would never be able to get out. I began to ascend the stairs slowly. I walked into a corridor. I saw a speaker stuck to the wall with several buttons around it. An intercom. I decided playing back recent messages as it might aid me. I pushed a light gray button. I heard a scratchy voice yelling out, "McCloys is out." I know. I have to stop him. Another voice responded, "Are you insane? He's killed 70 people. We can't lose another honest human. I have to. I know I can. Goodbye." "No. Chris?" Chris Tomley responded. "No." The recording stopped. I wasn't any more informed. I just knew that man, Chris Tomley, had either succeeded or failed in harming this McCloy. Either way, I didn't want to find out. I kept walking, my feet beginning to burn with each tread. I saw a closed door and I quickly swung it open. It revealed a workspace. This was obviously a closed building of some kind. I saw a computer and my heart lifted. Maybe I could reach someone, anyone. I turned it on and put the page onto Google. I typed in the name Chris Tomley. It took a while, but I soon found him. Chris Tomley, father of 4. Employed at the Grundle Psychiatric Ward. Found dead in his own holding facility. Bled to death. His last act was brutally and heroically taking down the famed McCloy who had been torturing him for a whole week. There was a link for the name McCloy, so out of pure curiosity, I clicked it. A picture ballooned up in my face. It was a terrifying man. How they got this picture I was uncertain of, but he was real. I could feel it in my bones. I looked at the picture more closely. He was a rugged man, about my height and build. He carried a large saw and his face was hidden in shadows. He had on the sort of clothing you might see a carpenter wearing. A tool belt was hanging about his gaunt waist. It wasn't a surprise he could be beaten down so easily. I became more intrigued about his weapon. Though this was an old picture, the saw had a glimmer. It made me want to touch it. Grasp it. Cut something. I couldn't quite tell where this feeling came from, but it became immense, one might even say overpowering as I gazed at the beautiful, shining. I shut the laptop immediately. This wasn't me. So, who is it? What was that feeling, like a monster pushing out of my heart? I wanted to find out more. I decided to roam a bit more. I walked down to one of the patient's rooms. I looked in. There was a woman sitting there. I breathed a sigh. Maybe she could give me some information. Hello? I began. No. Stay away. I haven't done anything. Don't do it. She shrieked and recoiled. I withdrew as well. I had forgotten that this was a psychiatric ward. She must be crazy. Then I saw that she had a name tag. It read Juliana. She was a nurse, so why was she acting so strange? Listen, I'm not a patient. I just woke up here with no clue who I was or where I was. I haven't come to harm you. I tried to make my voice as soothing as possible. Please. She trembled in the dark. I didn't understand. I decided to leave her. I saw the last door in the corridor. I swung it open, hoping not to find another question. I saw the blade that was in the picture I saw earlier. I drew closer, feeling like I was pushed toward it. I touched it. The blade was unexpectedly warm and wet. I took it up and saw a red drop drip from the tip of one of the teeth of the saw. I nearly retched. The saw dropped to the ground. I couldn't believe that anyone would do that. Who could be driven to that? When I calmed down, I picked up the saw once more. I looked at it, gazing at the fine blade and the sturdy handle. I could see the appeal. I felt like two sides of my brain were battling intensely between disgust and almost an admiration at such power in such a skinny man. I hadn't found an exit yet, and I was growing desperate. I found myself walking in circles. All I could think of was that woman, yelling at me. I finally collapsed from exhaustion and hunger. When I woke up, I saw a man standing in front of me. He was wearing a black, sleek suit. He was rugged and handsome. I looked up at him. Who are you? I croaked, throat dry from lack of water. He skipped the question and said instead, You disappoint me, John. I figured you would recover easily from a small bump on the head. What? I asked. Amnesia. How pitiful. Have you really not figured it out yet? Figured out what? I was beginning to get irritated at the pompous behavior that flowed from his face. Oh, how do I say this? You are John McCloy. He stated each word firmly, and if you don't know who that is. I was stunned. No. I said, oh yes, he contradicted cool. Well, then how come I haven't been killing left and right? How come I don't know where the exit is? How come it took me so long to figure out my name? Who are you? Those are some of the side effects of amnesia, aren't they? As for who I am, well, I'm just a little friend. I guess I've changed then. Not really, he smiled evilly. I was very scared of what was coming next. The man took out the saw that had been haunting me and my mind. "This has to bring something to you," he said. "No." I lied, shivering slightly. I hoped he hadn't noticed. "Liar," he hissed, "I'm not him. I'm not a murderer. But you are." His voice was rising. "You have been ever since your family was taken away from you. Ever since you were alone." As he said that, memories flooded into my mind. My family being killed because of false accusations. The pain split my head. They were murdered unjustly, in front of me. I could only escape with my life. I was scarred. And I decided that if my family was guilty and deserved to die, then everyone else did. Morals and logic meant no more. The blood rushed to my eyes. My heart was pumping. I took hold of the saw, feeling fulfilled. I was back in full. I wasn't going to stop anytime soon. And I never will. Post views, 2,455. Please wait. I've tried everything I can think of. Enough is enough. I first noticed the thing when I looked up at my window after taking a short nighttime walk. At first, I reasoned that it was just my mom putting something in my room. But as I came closer and looked harder, I saw its shape was hardly feminine. Hardly even human. What stood in my window was a tall, skinny figure, completely nude and lanky like a teenager, its skin the color gray. It stood taller than I did. And it looked down from my window at me whenever I was outside of my house. Its face was more humanoid than the rest of it, as it had a mouth, a nose, and two eyes, the whites of which shone like dimmed car headlights. It had an expression that was hard to read, fear mixed with exuberation, and entirely psychotic. The first night I saw it, it just stared down at me. It didn't move at all. I didn't move at all. I couldn't. I was dumbfounded by its presence. I felt a sneaking dread climb up my spine. And it settled on my neck. My mother and sister were in the house with that monster. I ran for the door. When I burst through, nothing was amiss. My family members sat downstairs, watching television as they always did. Panting, I stood before the screen and looked at them, wondering how they couldn't have noticed someone breaking into our home. Looks of concern showed on both their faces. "What's the matter?" my mom asked, frowning. "There's someone upstairs," I exclaimed. "What?" she cried, her voice raised. "How can that be? I saw him in my window." Without waiting for them to follow, I stormed up the stairs, determined to catch the criminal. I took a baseball bat from the closet on the way and, with a moment's hesitation, I exploded into my bedroom. The gray bean had inexplicably vanished. Gone, without any trace. I checked my sister's room, my mother's room, every bathroom and closet and pantry I could. The thing had disappeared. Somehow, its vanishing disturbed me more than its being here. That night I barely slept, waiting for it to emerge from some excellent hiding spot. It never did. After then, I've looked up to my window when I was outside, and every time I saw the thing glaring down at me like I was the freak. Sometimes I locked eyes with it, making threatening gestures to try to stare it down and scare it off. But it never affects it. It just stood there, watching. Waiting. After a week of seeing it whenever I walked my dog late at night, and even during the day when I looked up from cars I parked it in the driveway, I resolved to do something. What a mistake. First, I tried shutting the blinds and turning off the light before I went out with my dog. Sure enough, when I glanced up at my window the thing stood as it had before, with the blinds completely up and the light juxtaposing its gray mass against the yellow-colored room. When I climbed back up to my bedroom, the shades were as I had put them. I started to feel crazy, and unsafe. I started sleeping downstairs. The second thing I tried worked as well as the first. I stacked chairs and heavy boxes full of reams of paper before the window to see how determined this spirit was. As I should have guessed, all of the things had been removed from sight when I peered up to the gleaming portal. It just stood alone, its expression constant, its body not feeling my desperate eyes upon the gray of its form. As a final attempt before resorting to setting actual traps to catch the beast, I told my sister to check my room after I'd gone. She was still sitting on the couch when I walked through the front door, loath to postpone her sedentary life for even a few minutes. When I returned, she reported that my room was empty, and asked if I felt okay. Feeling the concerned and fearful eyes of my family members made me fearful for myself. For some weeks, I managed to come to terms with the gray bean's existence. I looked at it less and less, found its presence to be of decreasing importance to me. It seemed as if we could occupy the same space in comfort, staying out of each other's way. I had almost completely forgotten about it when the tragedy came. It was a Saturday, a day I typically spend out with friends. The evening was a time of stress relief in the form of driving around the suburbs I live in and causing a ruckus in a variety of ways. I left around 4 in the afternoon, and it was only 4:26 when I received a frantic text from my mom urging me to come home. When I got back, I looked up to my window, remembering the being that had become nearly invisible by its consistency. I froze when I saw that its gray, strange mouth was twisted upwards in a horrid smile. I burst through the front door. My mom was collapsed on the front room carpet, telephone held limply in hand, having just called the police. I knelt by her a few moments, comforting her in her distress, wondering where my sister was. Sentence after incoherent sentence streamed out of her mouth like dribble, so I left her there to check if the house had any clues to her distress. My natural response upon entering my house is to get upstairs to my room as soon as sociably acceptable. Logically, I would check there first. Each day I awake, I wish I hadn't looked at all. Blood coated nearly every surface, as if some explosion of red paint had sent it splattering the walls and ceiling. Parts of my sister were strewn on my bed, some of her organs lying on my desk, a good deal of her torso still and motionless in the center of my carpet. Her face had been torn off and nailed to the wall with a pencil, the eyes missing and nowhere to be found. The eyeholes were ghastly, elongated things, made to look like demons' eyes by the bloodied wall that was visible through them. I rushed onto the crimson floor, making the stench in the room even more sickening than the hemoglobin iron smell that fucked my nostrils mercilessly. I stumbled downstairs back to my weeping mother, and collapsed as she had. I did not cry, however. I only thought. And it became clear to me then. The being is too dangerous to let live. From then on, after police had come to retrieve the body and found no viable perpetrator of the crime, I spent most of my time at every public library in the county or on so-called witch websites I knew to be hoaxes, trying to find a method of purging the spirit from my home. I ordered holy water purported to be bottled at the Jordan River, sprayed it in the still red room only to see that same gray beast looking down upon me from within. No amount of charms or amulets or enchantments could repel the gray being. I cast protection spells, spirit wards, positive repels, waving my hands and chanting like a manic cultist. In a stupor of frustration, I tried pleading with the spirit, making a pact with it, left it offerings like it was some god to revere. Nothing could remove it from the window, and that brings me to my current state of mind. I have exhausted all possible means, save summoning a demon of my own or burning down my house. I would do the latter if I could convince my mother of the gray being's existence. But she always claims she can't see it when I show her its creeping vigilance. For some reason, I know nothing can rid me of this malevolence. That's why I've written this tale, this explanation of my next action. I'm going to climb onto my roof and go in through that window. I want everyone to understand why I've done this, and to make sure that this does not happen again. Believe someone if they tell you that they're afraid, and believe in what causes their fear, no matter how preposterous. No matter how gray. I've tried everything I can think of, enough is enough. This journal was found on Derek E. Weinman's person on February the 17th, among other personal effects including a watch battery, a wallet containing identification and several bills, and a packet of Big League Chew. Derek's time of death was 8:34 p.m. on February the 17th. Cause of death, still unknown. Though the official statement has been announced as suicide, no sign of a struggle or harmful chemicals found. Derek was lying face down on the floor of his room where his sister's body had been found. See, OFCL report, case 9A12. Vanessa D. Weinman. Please note that last page of quoted journal had difficult to read message, eventually determined to say why am I so great. Credit to Crosby Allison. Post views, 235. Please wait. I once had a great friend by the name of Johnny. He was the type of guy who could cheer the air wherever he went. A very laid-back fellow, the kind that could come up with a joke for any situation. He was a bit of a slob, but I'm no neat freak myself. Regardless, Johnny and I were inseparable. We hit on babes together, talked all the time about life in general and critiqued each other's writing. Oh, I should add that we were probably the biggest writing buffs at our school. My favorite genre was fantasy, still is to this day. But old Johnny boy had a different taste, and that taste was horror. Now, I can get behind a good horror story, but they aren't my favorite. Johnny, on the other hand, was borderline obsessed with horror. He would always show me these amateur horror stories on the net, called creepypastas. Still, to this day, I have no idea what pasta has to do with horror, but I digress. But oh, did Johnny love them. He would always tell me one of these days, Alex, I'll be the best damn creepypasta writer on the internet. I didn't really think much of his boast. I mean, everybody says they'll be the greatest text sometime in their life. Still, Johnny was hellbent on making the greatest pasta ever. I still remember what he said the last day of school. He grabbed me by the shoulder right when the bell rang, and told me that he would fall off the radar for a while. When I asked why, he just said he would be busy writing. When he said writing, he gave me a little wink. True to his word, Johnny all but disappeared after school let out. He was absent from all his usual haunts. Truth be told, I was a tad bit worried. But with the help of my girlfriend, I found ways to keep my mind off Johnny. Then, things took a turn for the ugly. I honestly can't say why I went to Johnny's house. Maybe my worries got the best of me, perhaps I had left something over there that I needed at the moment. Whatever the reason, the things inside that house have wiped the reason from my memory. The first thing I noticed that was off about Johnny's place was that the lawn was overgrown. I'm not talking a couple weeks worth of overgrowth here, the lawn looked like it belonged to some sort of abandoned house. Instantly, I knew that my worries had not been misguided. A tad bit uneasy, I made my way to John's front door. As a token of friendship, Johnny had entrusted me a key to his home a couple months back. I gripped that key with all my might as I made my way up the weathered, concrete steps that led to the house's front door. I slid the key into its hole with trembling hands. As the key slid into the lock, I contemplated just running back to my car and driving the hell away. I managed to muster up the courage to go on, though. I thought to myself, it's only Johnny in there, right? He wouldn't hurt a fly, so what would his best friend have to fear? I heard the lock click, and pushed the door open. The smell. Oh dear God. As soon as the door came open, the odor of a rancid corpse filled my nostrils. I even vomited in my mouth a tiny bit, but I choked it back down. Everything was telling me to just run the hell away, but I couldn't. I was filled with both a sense of morbid curiosity and concern for my friend. As I entered the house, I noticed pictures on the walls. They depicted some truly vile beasts, ranging from a faceless man in business casual, to numerous imp-like creatures, to abstract monstrosities. Sewn among them were pages of plain text. I felt a sense of absolute dread pour over me. As I made my way around the house, I found that the pictures became more and more crudely drawn. After a few moments of wandering the house, I found the poor creature. He was huddled in a ball, completely motionless. He clutched several papers to his chest. As I drew closer, it became obvious he wasn't alive. I wanted to scream, I wanted to yell for somebody. I didn't want to be in that house anymore. I bolted out of there faster than I thought humanly possible. I didn't bother to close the door, I just wanted out of that fucking place. Eventually, I managed to get my wits together and call the police. They questioned me a bit before ruling me out as a suspect. They found the cause of death to be a heart attack. The strangest thing, however, were those pieces of paper he was holding. Apparently, when the paramedics came to take him away, they removed the paper from his person. The papers were some sort of a story. They were also confiscated by the police. The suicide rate among police personnel in the county has risen dramatically since. Post views, 3,369. Please wait. I can't remember the last time I felt normal. I constantly move through life wondering exactly what it is that I'm missing in my genetic code that separates me so much from the other people around me. I continue to live my own life, and be myself, but sometimes that just isn't enough for me. My desire for normality drives me crazy. Sometimes, I just wanna die, end it all, commit suicide, but I can't bring myself to do it. So, I just wallow in my sadness, and carry out the banality of my life. I'm walking home from school one day, pissed about my shitty grades and this girl who turned me down, which is something I'm quite acquainted with by now, when all of a sudden this force lifts me from the ground and slams me into the brick wall, knocking the wind out of me and causing my eyes to water, distorting my vision. As I look up, heaving with tears running down my face, I see a shadow of sorts, grinning at me with the whitest teeth I have ever seen. I fear this shade for a moment, but as my eyes begin to clear, I make out the very familiar face of none other than Flash McCormick, the punk-ass kid who just can't seem to get enough of picking on the ants that surround him. What's the little pussy doing walking around by himself? I don't answer, because that's a stupid fucking question, and I tell him as much. His smile turns into a twisted look of malice and disdain, and he raises his fist to attack. Just then, Mr. Johnson, the vice principal, runs over and pulls Flash away, promising suspension or some other such bullshit, leaving me alone, bruised and battered, with what I'm sure is a concussion from my head hitting the wall. I walked home alone, and walked inside. Of course, my parents pay no mind, so I just go upstairs to my room, and flop on my bed. The crimson sheets give me comfort, and I feel myself drifting off to the land of Nod. Before I fall asleep, I pray with all my heart. To any deity who's listening, I have just a small request. Protect me from those who hurt me, and punish the wicked for what they have done. Feeling satisfied with my request, I drift off peacefully into a dream of love and sanctity, a world filled with my desires and achievements. I slept better than I ever have in my entire life. When I awake, I sense something is off in my room. It was as if the spell of my dreams had been destroyed entirely and replaced with something sinister and appalling. I quickly understand my uneasiness as I look to my closet door, and see the still grinning face of Flash nailed steadfast to it. I want to scream but I can't bring myself to make any noise at all. Slowly, my look of surprise turns into a smile, one that I do not control. I don't want to smile, but I can't help it. This shit stain is dead. But my mind slowly swirls, wondering who would do this, or who would go through the trouble to nail this to my door. It couldn't have been Mr. Johnson, and it sure as fuck wasn't my parents. My eyes slowly turn to the sky, and I begin to understand. I smile, and mouth the words thank you. I go to school the next day and no one seemed to know where Flash had gone to. I felt charismatic and free of his curse, while others swam in the sadness of his loss. I didn't care too much though. I was quite content with his absence. Everyone seemed to notice this, and people actually talked to me. My confidence was appealing and they flocked to me, realizing how cool I actually was. A few months passed by, and life was good. I had a new group of friends, I fucked Flash's girlfriend, and my grades were actually improving. I was happy for once in my life. One day, I was sitting in the cafeteria, when I saw this kid sitting by himself. He kept looking at me, and it was really starting to piss me off. I walked over and sat down next to him. Hey, why don't you take a fucking picture, it'll last longer. He looked timidly at me, and expressed his desire to be just like me, to actually have friends, to just be happy. I laughed in his face, before tossing his food on the floor. I walked away laughing, as my friends joined me and laughed with me about the fag whose food I just tossed. As I left school that day, I felt bad for what I had done, and the torment I had caused that kid. I didn't even know his name, so I couldn't call and apologize. And I couldn't find him in the crowd leaving the school, so I was just gonna have to apologize tomorrow. That night, Derek Glover went home in sorrow, having been bullied by the kid he wanted to be. In his sorrows, he sobbed for what felt like hours, until he felt himself drifting off. Right before he fell asleep, he prayed. To any deity who's listening, I have just a small request. Credit to J Boogie Post Views, 2641. Please wait. Right now, I'm a freshman in high school. I guess I could be called the weird type. You know, the one who always sits alone, glaring at the more popular kids. I guess you could also say I have to put up with a lot of crap from them, since they aren't exactly the friendly type. The female leader of the group, Lauren, is the worst offender of them all. She thinks she's so great, with her perfect blonde curls on her head, and her skinny figure. And I'll admit, I do want to be like her. We were friends when we were younger, but that's long since over. My only friend is named Mary, and we've been friends since grade school. We got into a big fight in 7th grade, but she told me she'll never do anything to make me mad again. You really should stop obsessing over her. Mary sighs, shaking her head. I just wrinkle my nose in disgust. I hate Mary. She can be so annoying sometimes. Me and her are just alike, though I don't want to be like her anymore. I want to be like Lauren. Beautiful Lauren who can get all the cute boys she wants and have them at her disposal. I do not obsess over her, I snap. Why am I even your friend? She just rolls her eyes. If you like her so much, then go be her friend. Fine. I reply, grabbing my food and walking over to Lauren. Lauren, can I sit with you? I ask meekly. Oh, sure. She answers with a smile. Hey, we haven't hung out in so long, maybe we could today. Lauren questions. That'd be great. How about my house at 6? And after a few minutes of conversing and me giving her my address, the bell rings and we go back to class. After school that day, I hurry back to my house. I giddily clean up the house a bit and make sure my parents are out of the house so me and Lauren have plenty of alone time together. When Lauren arrives, we have a lot of fun watching TV and sharing laughs over the fun times we used to have. And everything is okay until she says she has to go. I insist that she stays longer, but she says she has cheerleading practice in the morning and has to leave. She's just at the door when I have a knife to her throat. Suddenly, it's as if I'm in 7th grade again, and I've got a knife held to Mary's throat. She begs me not to hurt her, almost in tears. I insist that she stays longer, but she says she really should leave, stating that she doesn't know why I'm mad but that she'll never do anything to make me mad again. So I tell her that now, I can be just like her now, and I let the blade slice a large gash in her neck. I'm brought back to reality when I hear Lauren's corpse hit the ground with a thud. I give out a sigh when I see my clothes are stained red now. But no matter, those are my old clothes. I carefully pull off Lauren's pretty blue dress, peel off my own clothes, and put the dress on. After a bit of hard work, I've got her scalp peeled off of her head and onto mine. I smile widely when I look in the mirror and see how beautiful I look. Honey, does your friend want to stay over for dinner? I hear my mom yell from downstairs. My grin stays plastered on my face while I touch my beautiful hair. No, I yell back. But I'll be down in a minute. I kneel down to Lauren's body and put my hand on her soft cheek. Oh, Lauren, I start. Now I can be just like you. Credit to me post views, 2889. Please wait. I was 17 when she came. I'd been living with my abusive mother for 17 long, painful years. It was around midnight, and my mother was already asleep. So when the 3 soft traps at the front door came, it was me who answered. An odd-looking little girl stood there, with cheeks pale and colorless, blonde hair and braided pigtails, pink dress torn a little at the hem, feet bare and turning slightly blue from the cold of winter, and black eyes. Fathomless, deep black eyes. I quickly let her in, thinking of how horridly underdressed she was. It wasn't until later I'd wonder why she'd not been shivering, or even question as to why she was here in the first place. I got her into the living room, wrapping her little form in a thick afghan my grandmother knitted. She held it, though it didn't seem to affect her, and I smiled. "What's your name, sweetie?" A long silence passed, in which she stared at me. I was beginning to be discomforted by her black gaze when she parted her lips and spoke in a soft voice, "Lacey Morgan." I nodded, smiling again. "You can stay here tonight, Lacey," I said, motioning to the couch. She curled up in a little ball, black eyes still on me, and I exited the room. That night I slept soundly, not worrying about my mother beating me or the strange little girl on my couch. When morning came and I trudged into the kitchen, I was greeted with a coffee mug to the shoulder. I gave a feeble shout of pain, staring at my mother. "What the hell did you do? Why is there dirt on the couch?" she shouted, confusing me greatly. Upon investigating, I found that Lacey had vanished, the only proof she'd been there being some dirt that must have fallen off her dress or feet. I took responsibility, earning myself a strong hit to my cheek, then left for school. While there I heard something that sent chills through my spine. Lacey Morgan was found dead last night. I passed the day waiting for any more news on the subject, but found none. Upon arriving home, the news was broadcasting a live report on her though. Lacey Morgan, 6 years of age, was reported dead at 7 last night. Her body was located in the backyard, buried there in her pink dress. So far there has been no sign of her mother, Marisa Morgan, who is suspected to be the killer. Marisa has reportedly abused Lacey multiple times, and may be responsible for her death. Suddenly, a picture of Lacey appeared on the screen. She appeared very close to how she had when I met her, blonde hair and braids, pink dress, pale face. Only, her cheeks had color. And her eyes were baby blue. To most this would seem unimportant, but to me it was. She died before arriving at my house, if what the newscaster said was true. Died hours before. I tried to play it off, going about my business. I went to bed early so as not to have to see my mother. It was around midnight when I awoke to cool fingers stroking the bruise on my cheek. I sighed, leaning into the small hand. "Never again," Lacey whispered, before her hand vanished. Not 10 minutes later I heard my mother screaming. I rushed into her bedroom, nearly fainting at what I saw. My mom was thrashing wildly on her bed, a small creature having buried its face into her chest. I could hear the sound of flesh tearing, and my mother's screaming increased in volume. I wished I hadn't gotten up. Later on, I tell myself I hadn't. But I had. So, when Lacey pulled back from the gaping hole in my mother's chest cavity, I had a plain view of her razor-sharp teeth, glinting in the light. Glinting with my mother's blood. She smiled innocently at me for a moment, before swiftly tearing out my mother's jugular. That time I did faint. When I came to, I was in my bed. I walked to my mom's room, morbid curiosity getting the best of me. Upon opening the door, I found the room empty, the bed made neatly, as if my mom had left for work early. The only oddities were the dirty child's footprints, and the open window, showing that Lacey had in fact visited. I never saw my mother again, and I never missed her either. I eventually got married, and we had a child together. I named her Lacey. Recently, I noticed the neighbor's daughter has all sorts of scrapes and bruises on her arms. I've started watching their home. And the other day I saw something odd, a little girl running barefoot through their backyard up to their back door. It was around midnight, so I couldn't be for sure, but I thought she met my eyes with her black ones. And I could swear she mouthed 2 words at me. Never again. Post views, 11,114. Please wait. I used to live in New Jersey in an old Victorian, right in the smack dab middle of the boonies. Where I lived, Cell phones rarely get reception. Back a few decades ago, when I was a kid, a housing development went up. Big places. They cleared a few miles of the barrens for it. It was a stone's throw from my place. Once the places were finished, people moved in. City people, really. It was either old people or new families with real young kids. People that wanted to either wind their life down or start a new one up, nothing special. I knew a handful of the kids through elementary school, but none of them were exactly my age. They were normal. When the people moved in, my mom made an effort to meet everyone, with us being so close and all. There was one guy that stuck out in my mind, mainly because he was bald, yet young, probably 38 at the oldest, I want to say. My mom said not to say anything because he might have a disease or something like that. Years went by. I grew up and went into middle school. I came home one day. I had to walk because I missed all the buses. I went past the housing development. Glancing down the street, I didn't see anyone, not a soul. It was around 5:20, according to my watch, if I remember right. Normally, all the fathers were getting home at 5:00-ish. Curiosity got me. I walked down the street to see what I could see. Every house was dark, except for the bald man's. I glanced in his window, and saw about the entire population of the small community sitting in his living room. Children, parents, the elderly. Everyone. Standing in the middle of everything was the bald man. It seemed as though it was just a casual meeting. People were talking and laughing, whatever. I didn't know why the hell I cared anyway. I walked home and got grounded for being late and not calling from the school. That night my mom got a call from another local neighbor, saying that she was hearing unsettling grinding noises from the small community. My mom said that someone was probably getting work done. When she asked me if I had seen anything on my way home, I didn't answer, as I was still bitter that she had grounded me in the first place. The next day, every kid from that small neighborhood was marked absent in school, and the day after that, the police went to investigate that night. The first thing they found was an ear on the front lawn of the bald man's house. A severed, human ear. A child's arm was found, a trash can, dumped with a few empty pizza boxes, and a man's split-open torso was located in the woods behind the property, with human bite marks penetrating the flesh. The rest of the community was inside the house. All the entrances, both doors and windows, were boarded shut. When they broke down the door, they found the corpses of everyone, the entire development's population. Children, parents, the elderly. Everyone. Some were mutilated beyond initial recognition, and most were missing organs like livers and kidneys. Forensics showed that the victims were alive when the organs were taken out. A child's body was also found in the oven of the house, burnt to the point where the skin melted. Forensics showed that the child was alive when his skin started to melt. Children, parents, the elderly. Everyone except for the bald man. A background search on him proved that he was involved in a local sect of the occult, which are known to practice in the Pine Barrens. He fled. He hasn't been found. Needless to say, what happened literally tore our community apart in multiple ways. Instead of the boogeyman, my friends and I had nightmares about something real. About a bald man. Horror movies didn't scare me because I knew they were fake. What happened was real, and that terrifies me to this day. The massacre occurred in 1984, 28 years ago. I'm 41 now. I went back to the site last month. The houses are still standing. All of them are abandoned. The single road that once connected the community to the outside world is long overgrown. I can't find any police files. Nor can I find any news broadcasts about the murders. The houses are still there, but everything that had to do with that place seems to be gone. I could spend hours telling all the urban legends I've heard about it. Weird NJ posted a story in their book, I think. Nothing's conclusive. No newspapers, no files. I searched the records of some of the children from my school. They were never legally documented. But I know. And every other person that witnessed it and lived in West Milford County in 1984, knows. I cannot, in any way, express to you how much the events that I've described have literally ruined my life. If you doubt the reality of it, the only thing I can say is that you're wrong. This happened. This isn't meant to be a creepypasta, and this isn't an urban legend. The only reason I've posted it here is because I know that this is a community that will actually read what I'm writing. I'm not sure what I can say to make you believe. But a total of 37 people were murdered in the most brutal ways I can imagine. The place has a lot of names. It used to be called New City Village. Now it's called Demon's Alley. Look it up for yourself if you don't believe me. People need to know about this. For all it's worth, please share this. Wikipedia and just post views, 6,253. Please wait.